Welcome, everyone, to the latest installment of the podcast series brought to you by the North American Spine Society, where we highlight articles from the Spineline publication. My name is Alex Michael. I'm the chair of the Public Affairs Committee with NASS, and I'm a practicing neurosurgeon in St. Louis, Missouri with Mercy Clinic Neurosurgery. I am fortunate to have with me Dr. Claude Borowsky. He's a physical medicine and rehabilitation physician. He's also the chair of the Political Engagement Committee for the North American Spine Society. And we're here to discuss an often neglected area of healthcare, and that is one of political advocacy. In particular, Dr. Borowsky will share with us insight from his paper, Maximizing Effectiveness When Meeting with Your Member of Congress. And that will hopefully enable our listeners to better engage with political officials and make our voices better heard. So Dr. Borowsky, thank you again for being here with us.
You're welcome.
If you wouldn't mind just telling us a little bit about your background, maybe some of your training, and how you have become a part of Political Engagement Committee, and what really interests you in political advocacy from the beginning.
Well, actually, I really wasn't interested in political advocacy in the beginning. I did my training in medical school at UCSF. I went on to become a physiatrist and developed an interest in chronic pain management, worked with a group of surgeons and interventional physiatrists managing their tertiary pain problems. And I was quite happy just doing that and keeping my head down and making myself the best pain management physician I could be. But I became aware during the course of my work that there were other factors that were affecting my patients' care. Their relationships with insurance companies, their relationship with third-party payers, all the changes in third-party payment models that might deny them access to care. And it became clear that the whole job was not just what took place in the office, and that if I really wanted to safeguard my patients' care, I had to go beyond that and become politically active. Some of my background helps with that. I studied moral philosophy and medical ethics, which introduces you to some political issues and issues arising from politics. But for the most part, I was very happy just being an interventional physiatrist and chronic pain management physician.
Oh, that's excellent, because I think a lot of people have that same mindset. They get out into training. All they do is they want to provide good quality care. They want to perfect their skill set. But you're right, a lot of us have become limited by what we're allowed to do, the bureaucracy of medicine. And so I think a lot of people have felt that, but a lot of people are also a little timid about taking that next step. So I think that's a good segue into your paper on how we can enable the common practitioner to do just that. So I wanted to start right at the beginning. What do you feel like is holding most people back from advocating for their profession to the members of Congress?
Well, I think it's a combination of the fact that most physicians, and especially spine physicians, aren't natural political animals. They, like I was, they're very happy keeping their head down and doing an excellent job of what they do. And going that extra mile and attending endless meetings that involve political activism is not what we're generally inclined to do by nature. But it is part of what you need to do in order to affect change. The other things that really interfere, I think, are some myths out there that about politics that people outside of politics believe, but really when you actually start doing the work of politics, you realize are not true. One of the most common ones is that money is everything and that all politicians are bought and paid for. by big lobbying money, and that you're wasting your time if you're not tied to some big corporation that has huge cash slush funds. That really is not true, which you find out when you actually do political activism. There's also a lot of cynicism being generated by the endless stories about how dysfunctional the political infighting is in Washington. But that's a very sexy story for the media, but the everyday work that people are doing in Congress, forging bipartisan consensus on a number of issues and getting a number of things done, never gets covered by the media because it's fairly dull, but it's where most of the work gets done. And actually, that's where we can be effective, by letting members of Congress know what the actual work is like in the trenches, so that their policy that they work on is informed by reality. There's also a lot of people feel that if they have a political party affiliation and their member of Congress is not the same party, that they won't be able to get anywhere with political activism. And that's also not true, because the members of Congress, as I said, really rely on us as trusted sources for understanding what the real day-to-day practice of medicine is like. And no matter what party you're from, that information is valuable to your member of Congress.
Yeah, and you made a point to mention that too, that specifically medical professionals may have a certain respect that is garnered by their members of Congress that is different than other political activists, educators, for example. Can you tell me more about your experience with that and why you feel like physicians in general may have, an upper hand in getting the ear of their respective congressional member?
Yeah, because we live in the field, we tend to think that our what we do day to day just isn't that special because it becomes part of our daily life. But to most outsiders, the work of a physician still garners a tremendous amount of respect. And actually, a person who expressed that in a really funny but convincing way was the ex-NPR correspondent who now works for Fox, Juan Williams. He was talking at a political event in Washington, and he was talking about how we woefully underestimate how much clout and respect we have and carry with members of Congress. And the way he put it was, people walk into your office, walk into the exam room, take off their clothes and start talking about the most intimate details to you. And this is just mind-boggling to the rest of us. Yeah. Nobody has that kind of relationship.
Every day for us, yeah.
Yes. And it means something else to members of Congress. Many members of Congress actually, they transact in terms of trust and relationships. They use trust to garner support for what they want to do, and they cannot generate anywhere near the trust that physicians can, and it impresses them, and it sometimes scares them a little bit, because what they would do with trust like that is use it to convince patients to support them or a particular issue. We don't tend to engage in that type of activity.
I've never thought of that. Yeah, I mean, we deal with some of the most intimate dealings of their life, and times where they're at their darkest, and we can be accustomed to it because we see it all the time. And so you're so right. There's one thing that you did say too early on about that kind of the lack of getting into advocacy. And I think it's partially because we don't see a direct correlation to benefit. And I think physicians at times can be that way too. Just being transactional, especially as you get older and more established. You want to see a one-to-one relationship with whether it's RVUs or some kind of outcome. And for political advocacy, you don't really see that directly correlating with anything to help you, I guess, immediately.
Yes,
And maybe that plays a part for a lot of people.
that is very, very true. And it's one of the things we have to fight in our own nature to be effective advocates. Advocacy is more like the steady drip, drip, drip that carves the Grand Canyon. You don't win every battle, you don't win every war, but if you're there in your congressman's office, and if you're on Capitol Hill year in and year out, people start to adopt the way of thinking that you're conveying. It takes years, but it allows you to win battles down the road. You can't feel like you have to win every fight, because that's just not possible. Congressmen have huge world of things to deal with, and we have to sometimes accept that our issues are not the most important at that moment.
So in your life, has there been a single moment or a sequence of moments when you started realizing that activism on your part was actually able to affect change in policy?
Yeah, there were two big aha moments for me. One was in 2013. The Gang of Eight was pushing comprehensive immigration reform, which, by the way, was supported by every moneyed interest in the country. Every business was interested in seeing that pass. We were going to Washington. I think it was with NASS. It might have been with the Alliance of Specialty Medicine, and we were going to the offices of our congressmen to do our usual visits. And typically, what you would see as you're walking through the halls of Congress is a smattering of people wandering through the halls, going from place to place. What we were confronted with that day was literal rivers of people, many of whom had themed T-shirts opposing the comprehensive immigration reform. And these rivers were in every office building on the Capitol that day. And every time we stepped into a congressman's office or a senator's office, they were rattled. They could not concentrate on the issues that we were trying to bring to them. They were concerned that if they went the wrong way on immigration, their careers were over. And that showed me for the first time in stark detail how motivated activism and incited electorate can overcome any amount of money on an issue. The other moment that I've had several times is when I've watched congressmen holding hearings, often on C-SPAN, and heard them parrot back some of the talking points that we have shared with them over the years as advocates for spine care. Once again, that was not the river of activism. That was the steady drip, drip, drip of activism yielding fruit. And we've gotten many, many members of Congress to come around to our way of thinking about policy measures that are good for spine care.
Yeah, and back to your point where money can only go so far, but it's really votes that put them in their seat to begin with, and they know that. And when it comes down to voting for the different issues, they remember the people that they're trying to represent. And you also made a really
go ahead.
Well, I was going to mention your excellent point about how they try to, I guess, average out the numbers if they get a certain amount of emails or foot traffic. they're trying to make an estimate on how that relates to the general public, because obviously everybody has an idea and can take a political side, but not everybody expresses it. So they try to look at that expression as some kind of representation of the general public. So all those, they seem like they add up in the mind of a politician.
Yes, this was taught to us by the professional lobbyists for the Alliance of Specialty Medicine. Every congressional office tallies visits and letters and phone calls on and the issues that they're about. One letter is assumed to represent 10 possible voters. One visit, in-person visit, is assumed to potentially represent 100 voters. So if you can get 50 people during 2 years of a congressional cycle to visit a congressman's office on a particular issue, they're assuming that there's 5,000 votes out there that might not go their way if they don't do something constructive about the issue that you're raising. And in many closely fought elections, 5,000 votes can be the difference between going back to Washington and staying home.
Yeah, absolutely. So for someone like myself, someone naive in advocacy, wanting to become more involved, can you go over maybe a few initial steps that you would recommend to take?
Yes.
We should, we'll start with spine professionals. I am curious to hear a little bit more about the Alliance of Medicine, and what that includes. Is NASS have an arm under that larger umbrella? Is that made up of multidisciplinary smaller groups?
The Alliance of Specialty Medicine is a larger alliance of which NASS is a participant. It involves gastroenterologists, neurosurgeons, spine surgeons, ophthalmologists. There used to be cardiothoracic surgeons, there's neurologists, and there's a number of other subspecialties that are part of it. It represents about 150,000 physicians. So it's a sizable group, and NASS benefits from piggybacking on that group. They also carry with them a great deal of resources for teaching. In fact, some of what I've learned about advocacy has come from learning from the professionals at the Alliance of Specialty Medicine. But for people in NASS, the first step is really to get involved as part of the NASS Action Network. And that's easy enough to do. You can contact the advocacy committee staff, and they will reach out to people and facilitate them participating to the degree that they feel comfortable. Very beginning way is just simply by becoming aware of and getting involved with email blasts on various issues that are raised by the advocacy committee that are important to spine care, and which come out periodically in the emails that are sent to all NASS members. The advocacy committee staff, who are very excellent, Harry DeCabo and Joshua Webster, will also help facilitate your first visit to a member of Congress. And if you wanted to visit in-home at the in-home district, they will provide you with materials on the issues that NASS frequently presents every year. Those issues change depending on what the legislative agenda looks like, but there are issue briefs that present issues related to things that the advocacy committee has been pushing with members of Congress. There's also primers on how to be effectively advocate. Some of that is summarized in my article, and it can go from there. A great learning experience is joining one of the NASS trips to Washington, D.C., where we visit various congressman and congressional and Senate offices, including, if you're there, if you sign up, your personal member of Congress's office, and you advocate with several other members of the committee and see how they approach things.
How often are those trips? Are they a couple times a year, or is it once
the
a year?
NASS meeting is typically in April once a year, and the Alliance of Specialty Medicine meeting is usually sometime in July. If you're a wilting flower and you hate the heat, I would recommend the April meeting because Washington, D.C. in July in a tie is not for the faint of heart.
Well, how about with the advent of social media platforms and more digital platforms, is there other ways that are being utilized to advocate for policy change that you feel like is just as engaging with political officials, or perhaps even more engaging? Are you seeing more of that different avenue instead of person-to-person contact or emails?
Well, with COVID, Zoom meetings and email communication has really taken over. We hadn't done an in-person meeting for about 2.5, 3 years. And we're just going back to it this year. A lot of people are active on Twitter. I've never really fallen in love with Twitter. I'm not the best source for how best to utilize that. Although, once again, the NASS advocacy staff can really help people become effective Twitter users. I've just never fallen in love with that platform.
Yeah, I haven't either.
I may just be too old.
No, it's not it. No, I don't understand it. Well, what advice would you give to someone who is maybe hesitant or intimidated about meeting with their member of Congress directly, especially in this time where everything is digitized and there's almost faceless, opponents or proponents, I guess, if you're on social media?
I would say jump right in because believe it or not, your congressman really wants to see you. Like I said, the medical professionals are greatly respected. Their opinions are really, really helpful. Congressmen are awash with professional lobbyists hawking opinions that they know are financially motivated. They're awash with academics who tend to be in love with pushing their particular theories of what's best for medical reform. And they just find it incredibly refreshing to meet with an actual doctor who can tell them stories of actual patients and who is telling them what the reality is in the trenches, things that they don't necessarily hear from people who are motivated to tell them how successful their policies are.
I was just about to bring that up, and you make a mention of that multiple times. Tell a story, make it personable, make it relatable, and you guys have found that to be very impactful and even brought up in the future.
Yes, members of Congress are very sociable animals. They really love in-person. They love personal stories. They love to share personal stories, and they remember personal stories. Stats and position papers are good to share with the staff because it puts meat on the bones for policy positions that we're advocating for. But for your member of Congress to remember what you told them, tying it to a story is invaluable. And as I said, if you do that, you may hear that story retold in a hearing sometime on C-SPAN.
And you said that most of these congressional members have maybe a secretary, for lack of a better word, that covers their health policy, and you might be meeting with that particular person at least the first couple meetings.
Yes,
Is that
they have professional staff, volunteers.
Uh-huh.
Well, they're not volunteers, they're paid, but they have a volunteer mentality. They're very motivated, idealistic, highly, and they're highly devoted to their congressman and to providing them with the best information. They tend to be extremely young, but don't let that fool you. They, after a relatively short period of time, they know unbelievable amounts about the politics of shepherding policy to become a bill eventually. And they know all the ins and outs and challenges that policy might face. And listening to them is very important because it will open our eyes to the challenges that we face and helps us have a little bit of patience with shepherding a bill along if we're in favor of that bill.
Well, so what about following up with members of Congress to maybe continue the conversation and then trying to build a relationship? Any advice for traversing that?
Yeah, it's critical to follow up with whichever staff member you met with by email after your visit, thanking them, of course, for their time. And it's very useful to have some knowledge of what are the most important issues to your member of Congress as far as the healthcare field is related, so that you can then also offer your expertise as a resource should the congressman need some type of feedback as he's pursuing his particular favorite goal in healthcare. It's always valuable to leave your name and yourself as a resource. The other things that you should probably arrange to do is follow up if you met with them in Washington, follow up with them in their home office. If you met with them in the home office, follow up with them in Washington. And another thing that we've done often is offer to ask the staff of the advocacy committee to help arrange a site visit, an actual visit by the congressman to your clinic or your facility. They often find that very, very interesting. They get to see what spine care looks like. Sometimes you can even arrange a meeting with a particular patient who illustrates a point that you've been making. That patient will be unless they're from far outside of the district, that patient's likely to be a constituent, and the congressman will have a special interest there as well. That is often a way of really imprinting your identity and having the congressman remember who you are. And if they bring a staff member, which they usually do, along to that meeting, make sure that you try to cultivate the relationship with that staff member as well. And you'll be far along the way to having more than just a casual relationship with your congressman. They'll know who you are.
Yeah, all great advice. Well, yeah, I think we covered an excellent amount of material. Dr. Borowsky, I want to again thank you for all you've done to help advocate for all the spine specialists. And I want to encourage anybody listening that is interested in taking the next step toward advocacy to look into joining the NASS Action Network, or by taking the next step to join the Political Engagement Committee, if you guys are still accepting members for this next term.
We're always happy to see more people involved.
Excellent. Well, that would be the conclusion of our latest Spine Line podcast. And again, this is brought to you by the North American Spine Society.